The conditions out here on this planet of amateur video essays can be pretty harsh, so make sure you've equipped yourself with your having seen Dune Part 1 and or having read the book suit so you don't get spoiled. Safe watching, and please enjoy the video if you feel so inclined. Dune was long thought to be impossible to adapt, and yet just a few years ago the first half was made into a movie and was actually really good, both as a movie and as an adaptation of beloved science fiction novel Dune. This probably should come as no surprise, given Dune's director and co-screenwriter is none other than Denis Villeneuve, who has previously pulled off seemingly impossible tasks like make a Blade Runner sequel that actually holds a candle to the original, with Blade Runner 2049, and adapt Stories of Your Life for the big screen with Arrival. Admittedly, I have not read Stories of Your Life, but from everything I know about it, an adaptation as good as Arrival seems like an impossible task, and yet Denis Villeneuve made it happen. If anyone could make a good Dune movie, it would be this guy. Denis has talked quite a bit in interviews for Dune about how when you adapt, you kill. That was his motto going into the film. What he means by killing is that he took Dune and changed it, made it fit a different medium, and put to screen his own interpretations of what Frank Herbert was trying to do with his original novel. When you adapt, you kill. You destroy in the process of transformation. Going from the words to the image, this adaptation is my adaptation, with my sensibility. So, what did Denis do right to adapt the unadaptable? I feel this adaptation of Dune was successful because it focuses on the themes of the original novel, on Denis' sensibilities as a filmmaker, and on the experience of Dune. One of the things a good Dune adaptation must do right is focus on the book's themes, because that's what Frank Herbert cared about the most when writing Dune. He wanted to take a look at charismatic leaders and what happens when people blindly follow someone. One of the main ways he looked at this was with complicated politics, which the movie painstakingly adapts. The film has to explain the great houses, the Harkonnens, the Atreides, the Fremen, the importance of Arrakis itself, and a lot more I don't need to mention because just about anyone with an interest in this video would have seen the movie. The politics in this movie are all centered around Arrakis and its spice, the most important substance in the known universe. The spice of Arrakis, melange, is a thinly veiled allegory for oil in the Middle East. It is a rare substance necessary for travel that many foreign governments were fighting for control over. This is also done in a way in which people who have not read the book can pick up on these themes just as much as people who are already fans of Dune going in. In terms of how Denis recognizes this theme, he was adamant about shooting the film in Jordan, in the Middle East, which, when added to how little he changes the politics of the novel, tells me he understands and cares deeply about this theme in particular. Denis also makes sure to include the prominence of religion with the Bene Gesserit, and shows, just like the book, how much political control they have. The Bene Gesserit are involved in almost every political affair, pulling the strings in some way, shape, or form. Like, for example, the Reverend Mother helping betray the Atreides because it would benefit her and her goals separate from the Imperium. Dune's use of religion also comments on colonialism, especially with something like the Missionaria Protectiva, hopefully I pronounced that right, which spreads the Bene Gesserit religion all over the known universe in case they ever need to use local cultures. But mostly, the book and film's use of religion is to show how, especially when mixed with politics, religion can be and often is used as a weapon. Paul has visions of a religious crusade, which is pretty much the ultimate example of weaponizing religion for one's own cause. Most important to Dune's themes, however, is Paul Atreides himself. Paul is a mix of both politics and religion, being both Atreides royalty and Kwisatz Haderach, which I am almost certain I mispronounced. The Kwisatz Haderach, again probably mispronounced that, is the Bene Gesserit version of a messiah, in this case a genetically perfect being, meant to bridge space and time and to have the memories of all of his ancestors. And I don't think this counts as a spoiler for the parts of Dune that have yet to have their adaptations released to the public, but Paul is not perfect. Frank Herbert's intentions were to be critical of people like Paul, people in power who can convince others to follow them and believe in them because they say what people want to hear. Admittedly, Denis' adaptation has yet to do much with this specific theme, but it is there somewhat in how he is trained and how he behaves in certain moments, especially near the end. However, my main evidence for this comes from interviews with Denis Villeneuve for Part 2, where he promises this installment will make it clear Paul is an anti-hero, a thing Frank Herbert was so frustrated about not getting through to his audience with Dune that he wrote a sequel to emphasize how flawed of a character Paul really is, and if all goes well, this sequel will be the final Dune movie Denis directs.
At the time, he felt that people were talking about Paul as a hero.
Sure.
And for him, he was an anti-hero. He was a dark figure. He was the book was a warning for him about a messianic figure. Me, I knew that. I knew that story. I knew I had the benefit of having read Dune Messiah. So I wrote Part 2, having that in mind. And that is why Shani's character is slightly different in my adaptation than in the book, and helped me to bring the initial intention of Frank Herbert to the screen.
Speaking of Denis and directing, the next reason why Dune is an incredible adaptation is because of the things Denis Villeneuve brings to the table as a director. One of the most obvious things is the visual effects. Denis Villeneuve, if you know anything about him from his personal experience, or even from the intro to this video, is fairly well versed in science fiction. He hasn't made a lot of science fiction movies, but the ones he has made have all been excellent, in my opinion, of course. Blade Runner 2049 and Arrival are both great movies for a multitude of reasons, and one of them is their visual effects. Denis and his team have a skill for merging real and computer-generated elements, often by focusing on scale. The ornithopters look real because the filmmakers paid attention to the lighting, and the designers designed the ships to look like physically possible technology. Whether they are or are not is for someone else to decide, but they at least look possible. The sandworms look convincing because of the way they disrupt the sand, and because we see one of them juxtaposed against Paul near the end. These visual effects on their own are pretty neat, but when they are shown to have a realistic effect on their surroundings, the film feels closer to Denis somehow finding and shooting on Arrakis than these elements just being computer-generated. Denis also tends to focus on faces and hands. When you watch a scene from Dune, or any other of Villeneuve's work from the 2010s and beyond, you'll notice it's probably either an ultra-wide shot, where the characters are practically specks, or it's a close-up, focusing on the facial expressions of a character, or a shot of a character's hand. The faces, I think, focus the audience on what a character is feeling in any given scene. Denis can't go third-person omniscient like Herbert did in Dune, telling the audience exactly what each character is feeling at any given point in time, so he has to cue the audience in with their expressions. This is especially important with a character like Paul, who, especially in this part of the story, is very stoic. Villeneuve used the same tactic with Blade Runner 2049, making me care deeply about a stoic character. In Blade Runner 2049, Denis also focuses on hands, and he focuses on hands in Dune in much of the same ways as in 2049. In both films, close-ups of hands are usually shown when a character is interacting with elements, when Kay sticks his hand in the bee's nest, or when he feels snow, or in Dune when Paul feels the water on Caladan or the sand on Arrakis. Dune, especially, is about interacting with the environment, so these shots and Denis' overall visual language fit the story well. Lastly, Denis gets talented people to work on his films. This may be a cop-out, as these people I'm about to mention are not Denis Villeneuve, but the movie has a cast featuring Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, Stellan Skarsgård, Josh Brolin, Zendaya, and Dave Bautista, who barely shows up, but both his character and Chani are more important in part 2, so here's hoping he gets more screen time there. On top of the stacked cast, with even more cast members I'm surely forgetting, the film has a score by Hans Zimmer, who declined working with Nolan to score both of these films because he's always wanted to work on a Dune movie, and Greg Fraser as the cinematographer, who between Dunes was the cinematographer for The Batman. The film also has Theo Green and Mark Mangini as the sound designers, who previously worked with Villeneuve on Blade Runner 2049, and a visual effects team primarily from DNEG, led by Paul Lambert, Tristan Miles, and Brian Connor, once again reuniting with Villeneuve after Blade Runner 2049. All of these people are brought together by Denis Villeneuve, who, in all of his movies, has found the right cast and crew for the job, and they truly bring the worlds of Dune to life. Speaking of a world Denis brought to life, the biggest achievement this film boasts is how much watching it to me felt like reading the book. For one, going into production, Denis and his team relied solely on how they were motivated by the novel. Denis Villeneuve has explained in a few interviews how when coming up with the concept art and figuring out the general look of the film, he and his team would not use the internet or any other aid, instead relying on the novel's words and whatever else they might find in the recesses of their minds. His goal with this movie was for it to feel more like Frank Herbert than Denis Villeneuve, and he either did a lot of research into Frank Herbert's intentions with Dune so he could bring all of it to the big screen, or he already knew all of it going in.
I just focused on the book, kept the words of Frank Herbert very close to me. The book was my Bible. I refer to it constantly as I was shooting. All the answers were in the book.
Dune, the movie, also has a similar feel to Dune, the book, because it has a similar flow. The movie doesn't spend a lot of time in any one location, but neither does the book, especially in the first half. Both take their time with certain things, namely explaining the cultures and political dynamics, and both kind of speed through some things. They don't speed through the exact same things, and there are obviously scenes from the book that did not make it into the movie, and scenes from the movie that were changed from the book, but both have similar pacing, which to me is another reason why the movie captures the spirit of the book. The scenes both focus more of the runtime or words on are usually also similar, like when Paul is having terrifying visions of possible futures, or with the Bene Gesserit test near the start of both the film and the novel. Both feel very meditative, and when they slow down, they usually slow down to focus on how a character is feeling about something, like when Paul first inhales spice. Lastly, the book and the movie have a similar sense of discovery. Both the book and the movie are highly detailed, the book not always so much in landscape or design as culturally and politically, and the movie is detailed in both landscape and design as well as culture and politics. The biggest compliment I can give this film, accuracy-wise, is that it spends almost its entire runtime on world building. The film doesn't skip out on character building, clearly setting up Paul's arc of attempting to become the leader of the Fremen, and showing things like Duke Leto's care for his people and Lady Jessica's care for her son, but a lot of its runtime is dedicated to showing how things work, but in a compelling way, with setups and payoffs and actual plot and whatnot. The film isn't just exposition for exposition's sake, it's exposition for the sake of telling the story, and for immersing the audience in its world, which I wanted to talk about last because to me, the film's immersion is what it does best. I was late to the Dune party, watching the movie after reading the first half of the book just last year, so I watched Dune for the first time on my TV. Obviously, the ideal way to watch the movie, as Denis Villeneuve himself would be the first to point out, but I think it's a testament to this film's atmosphere that I could still get immersed in this world when I was bigger than it. The way characters interact with nature and how much time Villeneuve dedicates in this movie to just showing the landscape and characters moving through it makes the worlds of this movie feel rich and lived in. Add in the sounds, both the sound design and score, the visual effects, the pacing, and you get one of the most immersive movies I think I've ever seen. Dune is great for a ton of reasons. Denis Villeneuve can make a great movie out of almost anything, and Dune is already arguably one of the greatest science fiction novels of all time, but the best thing about the 2021 adaptation, and probably part 2 if you're watching this in the future when both Dunes are available for public viewing, is its accuracy. Dune is accurate in the ways you would expect, sticking closely to its source material and structure and in events, but it's also accurate in the ways it needed to be a worthwhile adaptation, emphasizing the themes, Denis Villeneuve's skills as a filmmaker, and genuinely feeling like the book. I don't know if there is such a thing as a perfect adaptation of Dune, but I'm almost certain this is about as good an adaptation of Dune as possible.